There are moments when a crisis no longer remains local. It is no longer only about a bombed capital, a killed leader, or a burning border. All of a sudden, the crisis begins to enter the lives of people who have no direct connection to the front, into fuel prices, into plane tickets, into cancelled flights, into supply chains, into financial markets, and above all, into the feeling that the world has entered a new stage. This is what we are seeing now around Iran and the Gulf. It is not just a military episode, it is a stress test for the entire region and, indirectly, for the global economy. In recent days, the conflict has escalated rapidly, and the effects have not stopped at Iran's borders. Strikes, reactions, threats, disruptions to maritime traffic, pressure on energy infrastructure, chaos in aviation, and growing nervousness in the markets. All of these have overlapped at such a rapid pace that many people have the impression they are watching not one single crisis, but several crises that have exploded simultaneously. And this is the real stake of this moment. Not only who is striking whom and which military target was hit, but what happens when strikes hit energy, air transport, maritime routes, and market psychology at the same time. Because this is exactly where the part begins that affects everyone. Not only those who live in the conflict zone, not only the military, not only diplomats, but also the people who go to work, who pay bills, who have a planned vacation, who depend on goods transported by sea, or who do not even follow foreign policy on a daily basis. The first thing we need to understand is that this crisis moved very quickly from the logic of a localized confrontation to the logic of a networked escalation. We are no longer talking only about a single front, a single actor, and a single response. We are talking about a region in which almost every state can become part of the equation, directly or indirectly, through military bases, airspace, ports, energy infrastructure, alliances, or simply through its position on the map. This is where a mistake appears that the public often makes in such moments. People look at the explosion, at the most spectacular image, at the clip circulating on social media, and they believe that is the main event. In reality, the explosion is often only the beginning. What truly matters is where the shockwaves go, because the shockwaves of a modern conflict propagate through systems: energy, shipping, aviation, finance, insurance, logistics, political discourse, public panic. In this case, the shockwaves immediately hit three sensitive areas: energy, aviation, and the markets. And this is exactly where the questions begin that matter to people even if they are thousands of kilometers away from the Persian Gulf. What will happen to oil? How long will the sky remain closed? Is this a panic spike of 2 or 3 days, or the beginning of a longer problem? Are only flights from the region being stopped, or are entire routes between Europe and Asia being blocked? How much of this crisis is real military effect, and how much is an effect of perception, fear, and chain reaction? These questions are far more important than the noise of the moment, because they determine whether the episode remains a news shock or turns into an economic shock. The second crucial point is the Strait of Hormuz. Every time a major escalation appears in the Gulf, everyone arrives at the same question: what happens to Hormuz? And this is not a media obsession, but a strategic reality. It is one of the most sensitive energy routes in the world. A huge share of global oil flows passes through it. When the area enters a risk zone, the market no longer reacts only to what has already been hit, but above all to what could be hit tomorrow. Here, an important distinction appears that many ignore. Danger to flows does not automatically mean that the world is left without fuel, but it almost certainly means volatility, higher costs, delays, and a risk premium added to the price. Sometimes the market does not need a total and prolonged blockade to react harshly. Uncertainty is enough. A few attacks, a few stopped ships, a few alerts, and the prospect that the situation could worsen rapidly are enough. In such moments, markets do not buy only oil, markets also buy fear. And when fear enters the price, abrupt, disproportionate movements appear that are hard for the general public to anticipate. People see only the number at the pump and wonder why it has risen. Behind it, however, there is an entire chain of reactions: traders hedging risk, shipping companies changing routes, insurers raising costs, importers rushing to secure deliveries, states monitoring reserves, companies postponing decisions. And here the key word of this energy crisis appears: duration. Not only the intensity of the strikes, not only the drama of the headlines, the duration of the threat. If tension decreases quickly, the market can correct part of the panic. If the threat persists, logistical costs settle into the system, and the shock becomes more than an emotional reaction. It becomes structure. The third piece of the puzzle is the OPEC plus response. In theory, it seems simple. When the market fears an oil shortage, producers increase output and calm prices. In practice, things are far more complicated. An increase in production does not automatically solve the problem if the route through which the oil must be transported remains at risk. In addition, not all producers have the same capacity to ramp up quickly. Some are already operating close to their limit. Others can increase output, but not enough to instantly offset a global panic. This means that any announcement of increased production has two components. The first is the physical component, meaning the real volume that enters the market. The second is the psychological component, the signal sent to traders and buyers. We are trying to stabilize, we are trying to prevent a shock, we are trying to show that the system still works. The problem is that the market may respond very coldly to this signal if transport risk remains high. The market may say, yes, you are producing more, but can you deliver safely and on time? This is exactly where the difference between the real economy and the headline economy becomes visible. The headline says production is increasing. The market asks whether those barrels are reaching where they need to go, at what pace, at what cost, and with what risk. And when energy, logistics, and expectations move at the same time in the wrong direction, even the right measures can seem too small, too late, or insufficient. The fourth dimension, the most visible to the public, is aviation. For many people, the crisis becomes real the moment "cancelled" appears on the screen. Airspace closures, flight suspensions, blocked regional hubs, planes grounded, stranded passengers, crews held in cities where they were not supposed to remain. This is where the geopolitical conflict suddenly descends into everyday life. Many people look at cities like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, or Doha only as destinations or elegant transit points. In reality, they are global infrastructure. They are nodes through which massive flows of people and cargo pass between Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Indian Ocean. When one of these nodes stops, the effect does not remain local. Entire networks become disrupted. A plane that does not take off from a hub does not affect only that flight. It affects connections, aircraft rotation, crew schedules, slots at other airports, cargo that was supposed to be loaded, passengers who miss flights hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. And there is one more thing the public does not see immediately. Even if the airspace partially reopens, the system does not instantly return to normal. In such situations, companies switch into emergency mode. They prioritize repatriations, reorganize aircraft, move crews, cancel regular commercial flights, operate in a limited way and under pressure. The screens light up again, but that does not mean the network has recovered. It only means the system is trying to get up off the floor. That is why, for tens of thousands of people, this crisis does not translate only into images of explosions and official statements. It translates into nights in airports, additional costs, uncertainty, broken routes, and the simple question all stranded passengers have: when do I get home? And when a geopolitical crisis produces exactly this question on a large scale, it stops being perceived as distant news. It becomes direct experience. The fifth dimension, perhaps less visible but extremely important, is the narrative war. In any major conflict, it is not only armies and drones that confront one another. Explanations confront one another too. Who defines first what is happening? Who assigns blame? Who appears defensive? Who appears to be the aggressor? Who appears to be the mediator? Who appears hypocritical? All of these narrative frames are built almost in real time. In such moments, states, television channels, commentators, propaganda outlets, and political influencers try to turn chaos into a story that is easy to consume. Some say everything confirms the collapse of the international order. Others say it is proof that only force matters anymore. Others try to use the crisis to justify older policies, older wars, or controversial alliances. And this is exactly where the danger appears. The larger the conflict becomes, the more space there is for manipulation. That is why it is essential to separate facts from interpretations. Facts are verifiable events, strikes, victims, flight restrictions, affected ships, official reactions, market movements. Interpretations are the conclusions drawn from those facts. Some are legitimate, others are forced. Some are analysis, others are propaganda. The problem is that in the online environment they come mixed together, and the public consumes them as a single stream. In such a context, tone matters enormously. A text can contain real information and still become manipulative through the way it links those elements together. If you select only the elements that support one thesis and ignore the nuances, if you alternate facts with sarcasm and moral judgments, if you use fear as narrative fuel, then you are no longer only informing. You are directing the public's emotion in a particular direction. That does not mean we must eliminate interpretation completely. It only means we must be honest when we move from fact to opinion. The public needs context, not only viral clips and statements cut into pieces. It needs to understand not only what happened, but also what is still unclear, what cannot be independently confirmed, and which scenarios are plausible, not only the spectacular ones. There is another dimension that complicates the situation even more, the conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan. At first glance, many people view it as just another news story, separate from the Gulf crisis. In reality, at a moment of regional stress, any additional escalation near the corridors between the Middle East and Asia can amplify disruptions. When you already have closed or restricted airspaces, maritime routes under risk, and nervous markets, a major confrontation in a neighboring area is not just a local problem. It becomes yet another pressure factor in an already tense system. This is the big picture that many people do not see at first. You do not have a single fire. You have multiple hotspots, and global systems are forced to move between them. Energy must be transported, planes must be rerouted, companies must make decisions quickly, insurers must recalculate risks, states must send signals, and all of these decisions are made under conditions of incomplete information and public pressure. This is exactly how errors appear. This is exactly how disproportionate reactions appear. This is exactly how a crisis that looked local on the map is sometimes prolonged. Because in today's world, local no longer means isolated. Local can mean a critical node, and a struck critical node transmits shock across the entire network. Now the truly important question is what must be watched in the coming days. Not rumors, not clips taken out of context, not numbers repeated without a source, but the real indicators that show whether the crisis is stabilizing or deepening. The first indicator is the state of maritime flows through the Gulf area, and especially through Hormuz. Not only political statements, but the real movement of ships, the pace of loadings, new incidents, insurance costs, and the reaction of shipping companies. If ships continue to hesitate, if new attacks or alerts appear, the market will continue to price in risk. The second indicator is the functioning of regional air hubs. Partial resumptions are important, but they must not be confused with a return to normal. What matters is the real volume of flights, operational stability, the ability of companies to rebuild connections, and the speed at which the network recovers its rhythm. If the recovery is slow, the effects spread farther than they appear at first glance. The third indicator is the tone and content of political signals coming from major actors. In such crises, a single statement can calm the market or ignite it. Sometimes an ambiguous wording, a threat, or a rushed reaction produces almost the same effect as a military incident. That is why it is not only what happens on the ground that matters, but also what is communicated about what may happen next. The fourth indicator is the existence of real de-escalation channels. Not only public calls for calm, but concrete mechanisms, contacts between states, mediation, incident avoidance procedures, safety corridors, coordination for traffic. Without such mechanisms, every new incident becomes a spark for a new wave of panic. And here we reach the conclusion that many ignore because it does not sound dramatic enough. Large crises do not destroy only through direct strikes. They also destroy through distributed uncertainty. One attacked tanker can stop or delay many others. One affected air hub can block thousands of journeys. A threat to an energy route can raise prices far beyond the conflict zone. A single propaganda narrative can push entire societies toward fear, anger, or wrong conclusions. That is what makes the current moment so dangerous. Not only the violence itself, but the fact that several essential systems are being pushed into the red zone simultaneously. Energy, air transport, shipping, markets, and political discourse influence one another. When one fails, it puts pressure on the others. When two or three enter stress at the same time, the crisis begins to acquire its own rhythm and becomes harder to control. If tensions decrease quickly, the world will view this episode as a severe but temporary shock. But if the threat persists, if incidents continue, if transport networks remain disrupted, and if political signals remain aggressive, then we will not be talking only about a crisis in the Middle East. We will be talking about a new stage in which geopolitics strikes directly at the cost of living, mobility, and economic stability on a global scale. The alarm signal is not only the noise of explosions. The alarm signal is the moment when energy markets, maritime routes, and the sky between Europe and Asia begin to jam at the same time. Then you understand that you are no longer watching only a regional conflict, but a crisis that has found the sensitive points of the modern world. And perhaps this is the most important lesson. In a connected world, vulnerability does not appear only where a bomb falls. Vulnerability appears where systems depend on one another. A port, an air hub, a strait, a logistics chain, a nervous market, a hurried political class, and an information space saturated with propaganda. All of these can turn a conflict into a domino effect. That is why the question is no longer only who struck, who responded, and who won the headline of the day. The real question is who can stop this domino before the bill reaches everyone. Because in the end, that is exactly what makes a global crisis different from a regional one, not the size of the explosion, but the distance to your life.